afternoon, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Jeffrey Yan from Microsoft. On behalf of Microsoft and the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, I would like to welcome you to this joint showcase session on the importance and socio-economic value of Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 for Africa. It's our pleasure to welcome you and to this discussion. In so much as the same way that Microsoft is a platform company that provides technology platforms for great innovation, we're really pleased to partner with the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance and Forum Global using this platform to provide a forum for a great discussion about the increasing importance and economic value of the next generation Wi-Fi represented by the upcoming Wi-Fi 6E and the forthcoming Wi-Fi 7, which will enable a great benefit of use cases that we have been enjoying using Wi-Fi technology so far, but will be more expanded. At Microsoft, we are a strong advocate for a balanced portfolio of both licensed and unlicensed spectrum in support of a vital, vibrant, and sustainable connectivity ecosystem. So we do support both the 5G cellular licensed technology as well as the unlicensed technology such as Wi-Fi RLAN use. I would like to use this opportunity to really just say welcome and also to highlight that there are two objectives that we try to achieve within this showcase session. One is to share some local data points that Professor Kuss from Columbia University will be sharing with you on the data behind digital divide in the continent of Africa. And you will we'll also hear from a panel that's moderated by Dr. Suarez, president of Dynamic Spectrum Alliance, together with a number of regulators from other regions outside of Africa to share the global insights and global perspective on Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi, the use of 6 gigahertz for RLAN use. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Professor Kuss, who will be making the presentation. Professor Kuss is the president of Telecom Advisory Services, and he also, as his title suggests, a professor at Columbia University, where he leads the business strategy research at the Center of Teleinformation at Columbia University. And he's an author of many economic studies reports, including many of them in specific countries on the use of 6 gigahertz for RLAN use, which is published in the DSA website. So I encourage you, when you get a chance, to check it out from the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance webpage. Without further ado, over to you, Dr. Kuss.
Hi, thank you, Jeff, and good morning or good afternoon to all of you. The purpose of my presentation is going to be to set the stage in the discussion of what's the situation of broadband connectivity in sub-Saharan Africa, and just to understand in that context what could be the relevance of making some portions of the spectrum assigned for unlicensed use. But I'm not going to refer to that. I'm going to take a step back and focus more on the overall broadband situation. Next slide. Let's talk about what the nature of the problem is and what is the challenge. Basically, in my view, the challenge we're facing in Africa is a population that does not use the internet. And these numbers are presented in an opposite way with what you generally tend to see in terms of broadband penetration. I'm focusing here on the broadband non-adopters by continent around the world, and purposefully the geographic categories are those that are used by the International Telecommunication Union. But I'm focusing on two technologies, 4G, which in my view is what is the starts to be the appropriate wireless standard to deliver broadband services on a wireless basis, and fixed broadband, which might include all different technologies ranging from DSL to FTTH to cable modem. And on the 4G, our metric focuses on what we tend to call unique subscribers, which is the term that the GSMA uses to measure only those individuals that are subscribing to service. And for that, we prune out those of us that tend to have more than one line, but actually we're a single individual. So in a way, it gives us the true actual penetration. And again, since I'm focusing on non-adopters, I'm looking at the inverse of penetration. And what we see is in terms of 4G, the non-adopters are close to 70%. And on fixed broadband, which in this case is measured by penetration by household, is that 94%. This is the highest portion on non-adopters around the world. And if one were to buy on the premise that in today's world, particularly under COVID circumstances, access to the internet is critical to fulfill health, distance learning, electronic commerce, electronic government services. This is a critical service. That is the nature of the problem. That is the nature of the challenge. Next slide, please. How can we explain that? And if you focus on the small white chart on the left-hand side of this page, this is the way we tend to understand the nature of non-connectivity, so to speak. And there are two dimensions of that. First, if one considers the number of households, there are a portion of the population that does not access the internet because clearly there's no coverage in terms of network deployment. We call that the supply gap. But in addition to that, of the population that is actually covered by service, there's a portion of the population that does not buy service for reasons that I'm going to evoke later. So we have two types of gaps when one looks at the digital divide. The supply gap, non-network coverage, and the demand gap is people that could buy service, but they don't. Let's turn to the right-hand side. If one looks at the supply gap in Africa, what you see there is the percent of coverage or not of non-coverage in both technologies. So what you basically see is that 55% or close to 56% of individuals are not served by 4G, which means that in many cases, what you actually provide access, you gain access to in Africa, is of technologies that are less powerful than 4G, could be on 3G, and even in some cases 2.5G, which from a quality of service standpoint does not meet the requirements of broadband access. And then when you look at fixed broadband penetration on a per household basis, the supply gap is quite important, 53%. So that's the nature of the networks that do not reach population. Next slide, please. Now let's turn to the demand gap, is the people that could buy broadband, but they don't. They could because there's actually network service in covering their homes or the places of work or study. And in this case, the supply gap, the demand gap, while it does exist, is less important, particularly when it comes to 4G. In a way, what it shows is the importance that mobile broadband has in Africa to fulfill the requirements of broadband connectivity. Only 14% of individuals that could purchase service do not buy mobile broadband service. But on the fixed broadband side, that's quite important. It's close to 40%. And that, again, is the dimension of the demand gap, people that could buy but don't. What are the reasons why people do not buy service if, from a technology standpoint, the networks cover their premise or their place of work or study? Well, one of the reasons, and the most important one, is affordability. Prices are still too high for a portion of the population. And when you compare the size of the demand gap, let's say between Africa and some of the developed regions around the world, what you see is that, let's focus on North America fixed broadband, there's pretty much no demand gap, in the sense that the price of service is pretty close to what the whole of the population can afford. But that's not the only reason. Affordability is one, but the others could be digital literacy, meaning that population does not know how to access internet and what to do with the internet. And third, content, the relevance of content. And the relevance of content has a number of dimensions, could go from language, and you'd be surprised to know that roughly one of the most popular sites in the internet today, Wikipedia, has roughly around 5% of its content that could be accessed by most of the population. Otherwise, it is mostly in English. So if you don't handle English, then you cannot access the population, the content on Wikipedia. Let's turn to the next one. One of the problems that we have in Africa is the level of investment. Even though coverage is an issue, when you look at what has happened with investment ever since COVID started, is that the investment per capita is been declining around 7% year on year, which means that even if coverage is an issue, we don't see that their level of investment of all operators in the region is enough in order to increase the coverage in the region. And that occurs pretty much in the whole developing world. But in Africa, it's quite important relative to the supply gap that I was mentioning before. Next slide, please. And on the other side, on the good side news, is that affordability is improving. In this case, we're measuring the cost of service as percent of the gross national income per capita. And as you see, on the mobile broadband side is roughly around 5.68%, which means that, in a way, the service is increasingly affordable, which explains why the demand gap is not that high when it comes to mobile broadband. Prices are coming closer to what people can afford in terms of purchasing the service. Next slide, please. Now, this is not a homogeneous continent. In fact, what you see today is that there are a number of countries in sub-Saharan Africa that have higher, in relative terms, level of penetration for fixed broadband and for mobile broadband. And those are the countries located in the upper right-hand quadrant. I haven't included South Africa and Mauritius just because the scale wouldn't allow me to depict the rest of the countries in a little bit more clarity. But clearly, South Africa and Mauritius are part of this upper right-hand quadrant. So what you have here is some countries that are starting to look more than what you see in more advanced developing world regions. And then there's the rest of the continent that is either facing one of purely broadband service fulfilled by mobile technology, or with low levels of penetration on both technologies. Next slide, please. Obviously, the second dimension of duality is the rural-urban. And if you focus on the coverage, in this case, on the differences between the urban population and the rural, you see that even though you have a duality in terms of countries, you have it in the interior of countries. Rural geographies are definitely less covered. 78% of the rural population in Africa today is not reached by 4G networks. And obviously, that will be much more in the case of fixed broadband networks. Next slide, please. In this context, Wi-Fi is acting as a very suitable complementary technology. We call it complementary because it complements the prior two technologies that I was referring about. And if you take just 3 countries in Africa, Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, the number of Wi-Fi sites is fairly large and growing. And if you focus on the right-hand side in terms of the the ability of Wi-Fi to support internet access for a large portions of the population is quite large, particularly in countries such as Tanzania, Kenya, and obviously South Africa. So what you have is another technology to provide access, particularly on a free basis, so people that cannot afford can get access to the internet. And secondly, that is reflected in the patterns of usage on the right-hand side. In conclusion, next slide, please. We still have a significant digital divide, and that's no news to all of us. Part of the divide is driven by the lack of coverage, as I mentioned before. And in light of that, the current level of investment that I see going on in Africa, particularly after COVID, where operators were concerned about capital preservation and liquidity, is that I don't see that there's going to be a dramatic increase in coverage on the part of networks. We're going to stay pretty much within that footprint that is covered today. And the other variable that is driving the digital divide is the demand side. And within the demand side, affordability is critical. And within that, still, we are not at the benchmark that the Broadband Commission establishes, that broadband services should not exceed 2% of the per capita income of a country. But it's coming down, particularly on the mobile side. And it is clearly an improvement. Now, as I said before, these trends are not uniform across the continent. There's a list of countries that are in a more advanced development path than the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, but we still, at the interior of every single country, we have the duality of rural and urban, and in that context, Wi-Fi would be a pretty good, it is a suitable complement to the existing infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Katz. And hi, everyone. My name is Marta Suarez. I am the president of the DSA, and I will be leading the next part of this session. So we have just seen the regional context in Africa, and understanding that context, one of our main messages for all the regulators and stakeholders in the sub-Saharan region is that it is important to dedicate more spectrum for Wi-Fi. And in that context, the 6 gigahertz band is a really good, suitable candidate because it can provide more spectrum, larger channels, and more capacity that will facilitate the adoption of Wi-Fi 6E, the new generation of Wi-Fi in the 6 gigahertz band, and in the future also Wi-Fi 7. We think it is important to mention, just before going to the panel, that Wi-Fi, it's a technology that it's very, how to say, it's compatible with different technologies, and we can have hybrid networks. So Wi-Fi is a complementary technology for mobile networks, for satellite networks, for fixed access networks, and it's affordable because that's the principle, and that's what we have seen in many deployments worldwide. So now I don't want you to hear from me. We have invited to this session different regulators, and I would invite all of them to join the scene. We have delegates from different administrations that have made a decision about unlicensed access or license-exempt access to the 6 gigahertz band. And we are going to hear directly from them about the reason of those decisions. So we have with us Mr. Glenn Fallas from Sutel, Costa Rica, Mr. Majed Akluli from Saudi Arabia, from CITC, and we also have with us Mr. Alan Ramirez from MTC, the Ministry of Transport and Communications in Peru. So welcome, and thank you for joining us in this session. So I will open the discussion, and we really want to hear from you with the first questions. It's like, which arguments have you considered in each one of your countries, in your administrations, when making the decision of unlicensed access or license-exempt access to the 6 gigahertz band? So maybe I will start in the order that we can see you in the screen. So Mr. Fallas.
Thank you, Marta, and thank you Forum Global and its organization for having us here, giving our point of view on Wi-Fi 6. Well, one of the arguments that we have in our country is the National Frequency Allocation Plan footnotes were already allocated for fixed services and fixed satellite services. And that was a thing to take into account. So we have to carry out some technical interference analysis to review the optimal operation limits for the unlicensed bands. That's to guarantee the coexistence with the existing services. So we consider two options, two operational models for these unlicensed bands on the 6 gigahertz band. We have the low power indoor, limited only for indoor uses, and we have its high it limits on 30 dBms of equivalent isotropic radiated power. And we also have the very low power option, which was for indoor and outdoor use, but has a maximum equivalent isotropic radiated power of 14 dBms. So today, according to our current allocations, we have allocated all the 1.2 gigahertz for unlicensed use, and we have managed to have coexistence and guarantee no interference between the fixed services and satellite services that were already in use with this new unlicensed band. So regarding the full 1.2 gigahertz allocation, we have to take into account that Costa Rica is an importer of technology. We don't develop the technology. So economies of scale were a key consideration on our decision. We look at big economies like North America, including US and Canada. So they adopt the full band, and that was one of the main issues that we as an importer of technology consider to have the full band to enable the capacity of 160 continuous megahertz channels to have these gigabit capacities for the Wi-Fi 6 applications. That was the main things that we considered to do this allocation. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Very interesting to hear about that. And now I'm going to give you the floor, Majid. If you could please share with us those considerations you have.
Okay. Thank you very much for this chance to let me explain our experience in Saudi Arabia. Before 1 year from now, CITC published a public consultation about fostering commercial and innovative use of spectrum, of radio spectrum in Kingdom. So we received more than 60 responses with more than 1,600 pages from different type of entities, such academic, mobile operators, verticals, satellite operators, and many others. So we believe that we looked on the subject from all angles, technically, economically, and even socially. So we decided to open this spectrum, the entire spectrum for unlicensed use, but this go beyond using only for the next generation of Wi-Fi. It goes to NRU, V2X, and so many other applications for smart homes and smart cities. So there are two main reasons behind this decision. First one, we call it balancing spectrum. We allocate huge amount of spectrum for IMT. So this spectrum needs to be balanced with a license exempt spectrum. And based on Cisco study, that more than 60% of the data traffic will be offloaded, mobile data traffic will be offloaded over Wi-Fi. So increasing the amount of spectrum for Wi-Fi will help on that. And the second reason for that, as we know, Saudi Arabia is the biggest telecom market in the region, and opening this whole spectrum will lead to have more ecosystem, more studies on coexisting, so that will lead to more spectrum efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we are seeing the same factors here about making sure that there is a coexistence and protection of the incumbents in the band. So thank you for that. And we also had a very interesting mention to 5G. So I think I will come back on that later. Mr. Ramirez, could you please also let us know which were the main considerations in the case of Peru?
Of course, Marta, thank you. As you know, through the Ministry of Transport and Communication of Peru, we took this strategic decision last April, and as you said, 1200 megahertz were identified as unlicensed band. First of all, the first argument is that we think it addresses a high demand from wireless devices for indoor use because of the recent lockdowns, because of the pandemic. However, the main argument is the next one. We had the purpose of balancing the use of spectrum, as Majek said. In Peru, we think that also balance spectrum among IMT and other services with unlicensed spectrum. This condition can help us to take advantage of much more alternatives to face our biggest challenges in Peru. In Peru, we have a huge connectivity gap there are more than 50% of rural settlements without any communication services. Just 20% of these settlements has 4G coverage. Fixed broadband services are focused in urban areas and the rural settlements without services. As you can imagine, they have low population density and are far away from urban areas. To address those problems, Peru developed some major projects in infrastructure. Besides that, we are building the digital strategy of Peru in order to be part of the fourth digital revolution. This includes, of course, 5G, Wi-Fi 6, and so many other technologies related to spectrum needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm glad we are having this opportunity, because then regulators from other countries can also hear from you. And I'm sure they will make a comparison with wherever there are similar characteristics on why you have made this decision. So I want to ask you now how this decision is related to your strategic plans for broadband. How is it going to impact your strategic vision for more adoption of broadband technologies in the future? So let me start this time in a different order. So maybe Majid, if you could please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. When we are talking about broadband initiatives, we are not talking about one set of technology here in Saudi Arabia. So we are talking about wire services like fiber to home and wireless services such as licensed 5G. And on this regard, enabling the 5G, enabling the full band for Wi-Fi will have direct impact on fiber, on 5G, as we said, on offloading. So we believe it will help our strategy of building good or the best 5G worldwide. It will help also in indoor coverage for fiber, and it will help to give more access to the internet. So it's definitely will impact directly with our broadband initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Glenn, if you could please.
Thank you, Marta. Maybe one of the things that we have to consider is that we share, according to Mr. Katz's presentation, we as Latin America countries, we share a lot of the same challenges that Africa region will have. So we have understand the impact of Wi-Fi networks on the connectivity requirements for end users, which have increased considering the COVID pandemic. Right now, the home office wireless networks are key for national productivity because of the remote work scenario. In that matter, we have even received some end user complaints where they argue low bandwidth issues. And when we do all the technical examinations, the result is that they have some Wi-Fi 2.4 gigahertz congestion, and that isn't the reason for the low bandwidth that they are expecting. So that is one of the things that we have to consider. Sutel believes that Wi-Fi 6E will provide the capacity, efficiency, and performance requirements by users, complementing the use of new technologies such as IMT and fiber. High-speed broadband will contribute to the improvement of labor productivity. We have recently approved a law to facilitate and to attract the foreign work of remote people. This law is called Digital Nomads. It is thought to offer some new migratory categories and taxes exemptions for the people from outside our country that want to bring these remote services in our tourist destinations. So enabling high capacity networks is a concern to ensure the success of these kind of projects. There are a lot of new technologies developing. For example, 5G, all my colleagues have said that they are also balancing the IMT allocations with the only censored allocations. We also do that. But Wi-Fi 6E is the home office counterpart of these new technologies, enabling gigabits per second speeds and low latency. So it will be a big impact on the productivity of our labor force. So that is the way that we are expecting that the full 6 gigahertz band allocation will benefit in terms of the increase of productivity, and also we will take advantage from the economies of scale that are already developing. So these are the main impacts that we saw in our digital strategy. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for bringing that, I would say, like horizontal perspective. It's like this decision is not only important for the ICT sector itself, but for different other sectors. Like in this case, you were mentioning about having places with broadband connections. So I guess that will be also related to tourism and other important economic sectors. So thank you for bringing that. Alan, could you please also let us know about how this decision is related to your strategic vision in Peru?
Of course, Marta. From our point of view, the main impact is to boost the digital development across the country. Peru is a relatively large country with many regions that are different in socioeconomic perspective. Since our spectrum strategy has a holistic approach of balance and flexibility, nowadays we have bands for 5G technology already in service. Currently, is an action underway for AWS3 and 2.5 gigahertz band for 4G, and Wi-Fi 6 is already a possibility in which we have huge expectations. These expectations are related to the importance improvements, as Glenn said, of the use of Wi-Fi in that band, such as faster speeds and low latency, and in the possibility to use WISP in the rural connectivity needs in further years. Last but not least, Professor Raúl Katz has published a study for Peru that shows us that the economy impact of the 6 gigahertz band will be about $22 billion in the next 10 years if we implement more use cases. This helps a lot in the current construction of the digital development policies in data governance, public digital service, AI, and new technologies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also highlight that important aspect that even if it is unlicensed spectrum access or license exempt, there is an economic benefit for the country and for the administration. So I think that is really relevant. Thank you, Alan, for mentioning that. And now, as you know, in Africa, in the sub-Saharan region, there is a current discussion as worldwide on the decision, like there is an agenda item for Region 1 on deciding about the upper part of the band that should be identified for IMT. And as Majid mentioned, there are many stakeholders that are interested on the future of the band. So I wanted to ask you, which have been the main challenges when you were in this process? And for the 3 countries, it was a very open and transparent process where you received comments from many stakeholders. But I would like to hear more about those challenges and eventually also the next steps that you have in mind for the band. So this time, let me start by Alan, please.
Thank you, Marta. In recent months, we approved 2 spectrum interventions. One is to enable TV white spaces services in the band of 600 MHz, oriented to rural needs. The other one is the identification of 1200 MHz in the 6 GHz band as an licensed band for indoor spaces. Like other countries in ITU's Region 2, USA, Chile, Brazil, Peru decided to identify the whole 1200 MHz for this. This is result of a process with, in general aspect, 4 steps. The main one is that we developed a strategy open to public consultation in October 2020. This document allows us to know what the perspective of the industry and academia are regarding 3.5, 26, and 6 GHz bands. We could hear as well different ideas to unlock growth and innovation through solutions like TV white spaces and hubs. In this one, we have some experience with the Google Loom project since 2017 and the use of balloons to bring connectivity in forest areas with difficult access. Well, the conclusion of this step, which is, by the way, recognized as a public best practice in Peru, is that 6 GHz has full potential while use the whole spectrum as an unlicensed band. At this point, I also want to remark that in the last years, we could do some important intervention for IMT services. For example, the refarming of 2 main bands, 2.3, 2.5 GHz in 2019, the establishment of spectrum caps for the low bands and medium band groups, and the development of a methodology of efficient use with territorial focus. This approach allows us to rapidly identify 500 MHz in 3.5 GHz band for IMT and to boost 5G test in 3.5 and 26 GHz. Well, the next steps in this process are related to public management. The first one was to modify the technical frequency allocation plan with the warranty of compatibility with legacy uses. The second step was to define technical aspect in the Wi-Fi 6, like transmission power and others. And the last one, which has been approved yesterday, was the fully declaration of this use case in 6 GHz band in the regulation of the telecommunication law. Thank you.
Congratulations, those are great news, and thank you for describing that process. Majid, could you please also let us know about the situation in Saudi Arabia?
Okay, I will be so brief. Being one of the first countries opening this band made us to do studies and consult on our WLAN policy, which has the limitation power for indoor and outdoor. So I would like to have this chance to invite you all to take a look on that public consultation. And on the other hand, we have existing users. So we have to be sure how to share the spectrum with them, how to protect them from interference. And this is the most important point or challenge that we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Majid. And Glenn?
Thank you, Marta. As all my colleagues said, to establish the allocation of the 6 GHz band, we run a public consultation. So we receive a lot of different points of view on the allocation of this band. But even now that the entire band is already allocated and the National Frequency Allocation Plan is in place, we have received a lot of comments and positions seeking the change of the allocation to have some IMT, at least the mid of the band allocated to IMT services. In that scenario, what we have to say is that um, we also have to seek the balance between the different services, as my colleagues pointed out. We have allocated 14 gigahertz of a spectrum for IMT services, considering low bands, mid bands, and high bands. So what we understood from Sutel's side and also at the ICT Ministry is that we have already done our homework in terms of enabling enough spectrum for 5G services. So the 6 gigahertz band, we decide the full allocation considering that balance that we have to do, because the only censored bands also brings development and also brings new connectivity options. So for us is a very important way of enabling different opportunities. We know that licensed spectrum is very important for the new development of services, but we know that at least in Costa Rica, for example, we have a lot of unlicensed bands service providers. Their only core network is unlicensed bands. So from our perspective, we have to seek this balance and to enable new ways of doing businesses. So that's one of the reasons that we went to do all the full 6 gigahertz band allocation for unlicensed services. And also we have to take into account that if you review some Amazon sites or eBay sites, they are already selling this kind of Wi-Fi 6E routers. So the technology is right now already developed. So that is also another thing to take into account. Thank you, Marta, for your questions.
Thank you, Glenn, and I think that is extremely relevant. We know that spectrum is like the main resource for wireless systems, and it has an opportunity cost if we just keep it and use, or we just don't take the most benefit of it. So in this case of the 6 gigahertz band, when we enable license exempt access, we are keeping the incumbents that are already operating in the band, protecting them, and at the same time, we are bringing benefits immediately for those that start using those equipment for broadband access, those Wi-Fi devices. So could I ask Majid? There was a question from the audience about when you made the decision, you knew about WRC preparation clearly. So which was your perspective? Why didn't you decide to wait? Why did you decide to move forward with license exempt access in the entire band?
Okay, thank you, Martha. Actually, we allocate a huge amount of spectrum for IMT, as Galen said. It's in different band, in low band, in mid band, and in high band, and we believe it's enough for IMT to rely on it. While there is a lot of or high demand from license exempt, especially from Wi-Fi, so we believe we couldn't wait 1 more or 2 years, but we can use the spectrum now with full band, especially the ecosystem is ready for Wi-Fi. So why not? Thank you.
Thank you. And for those that are attending this, we have calculated that cost of opportunity for many countries. And for example, in the case of Brazil, we found that if they would wait until 2024, they had an opportunity cost of about $17 billion, which is clearly an important amount. So unfortunately, we are coming at the end of this session now. So I will give you 30 seconds for a very short message and final message to all the African regulators and authorities that are attending this conference, and in general for regulators that will see this session. So maybe this time we can start by Alan.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you for the opportunity to share our Peruvian experience. I would like to finish this presentation by telling you that open consultation documents and proposal are maybe the best way to have all the information in order to make a decision that in our case we consider it a strategic one. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Glenn, final remarks.
Thank you, Martha. As I pointed out, Africa shares a lot of the same challenges of Latin America. And here we have Mr. Alan and myself. We are from Latin America. We understand the challenges that we are facing to increase the connectivity and increase the opportunities of doing business. So take into consideration the importance of global harmonization of the allocation of unlicensed bands. This will enable new ways of doing businesses. And as I told you, we already have a lot of service providers that only relies on unlicensed spectrum. So please consider the spectrum harmonization and the economies of scales that we will win if all the different parts of the world take it the full band for new unlicensed band services. Thank you, Marta, and thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you, Glenn. And Majid, your final remarks, please.
We think the license exempt is a very good way to license the spectrum, especially with new technology like talk and or listen and talk, and the coexisting studies that coming on the few years. So we believe opening the entire spectrum for Wi-Fi is a good decision, and if Africa follow that, we will be thankful and happy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for your attendance, and please have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.